we have a lot of, well, how should I put this, military power in this country that is indirectly controlled by the financial hegemons, by the oligarchy. And that's the great danger, that they will use this in the name of some kind of fictional national interest of the United States, national security, to attack this BRICS system.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and this is the Miles Franklin Weekly Special for July 17th through July 24th, 2023, while supplies last. And on this one, supplies may not last long. Because this week we feature 2023 American Silver Eagles at just $9.49 over spot, our lowest price on Silver Eagles in more than a year. Since its first release almost 40 years ago, the Silver Eagle has been, without exception, the world's most popular bullion coin, which provides unparalleled recognizability and liquidity. It's 3/9 fine, comes 22 a tube, 500 to a box, and is available at just $9.49 over spot while supplies last. Finally, the Silver Eagle is IRA eligible. And if you'd like to learn more about a precious metals IRA, call us, and we'll be happy to help you in that process. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
But you had enough confidence in the banks that they would always be able to pay when you wrote that check. And then when it was realized, well, wait a minute, that's not actually going to happen, because the banks are overextended, they made bad loans or whatever. The people, they were good loans at one time, but the people to which they loaned the money are not now capable of paying it back. All of a sudden, the depositors realized it's not there, and they ran to the bank to be the first one in line to get what was left. And so you had this whole series of runs that were going on through the 19th century, and that was supposed to be cured by the national banking system, a bunch of little cartels. And then that didn't work, and so you created the big cartel, the Federal Reserve System. And that didn't work because it collapsed in 1933. But fortunately for the United States, we weren't bombed to the extent that Germany and Japan and Russia and so forth were bombed. And we came out of World War II with this thing called the Federal Reserve System, which still had some credibility up until 1973. Okay, after 1973, all bets were off. And also that they were using the Federal Reserve System for international political purposes as well. So here we have these other countries saying, no, we don't want to participate in this fraud anymore, so we're going to set up a system that actually has a gold anchor to it. And all I say is, well, if you don't do it this other way, all you're doing is creating an international system that looks like pre-1933 U.S. banking structure, the pre-1933 Federal Reserve System, without the stability of the Federal Reserve System pre-1933, that all of the regional banks were in the same legal system. They're all subject to the same legal controls. So that's, as I said earlier, that's one of the initial problems here. I look at this, can you set this thing up? Or it's going to be the pre-1933 Federal Reserve redeemable currency, and the currency is now going to be some digital unit. Wonderful. What happens when one of these countries decides to play games? What's the legal restrictions on that? Well, in the old days, that used to be war, right? International settlements of those problems were war, or they led to crises of that nature, right? Well, that didn't happen within the Federal Reserve System because it was within one federal legal structure. So that's number one. Then number two is the whole concept of backing. Is this backing in the sense where there's some gold somewhere vaguely, but I can't get my hands on it? It's so far in the back that I can't get my hands on it. Well, then I'm not going to buy this system. It's the same fraudulent system that we have today. Because if you look at the United States system, there is this supposed stock of gold. Question how much is there, because they haven't held an actual audit in a long, long time. And the Treasury of the United States, Secretary of the Treasury, is supposed to buy and sell gold, transfer gold back and forth through the Federal Reserve System, so that the price of gold will be $42 $42.29 per ounce. Is that what it is today? No, it's not 42. It's like 2,000 Federal Reserve notes per ounce, right? So you look at the legal system that we have today, even within this country, they're cheating. They're lying. The statute says this, and reality says that. And most people are so befuddled. Number one, they don't read the statutes, but they're so befuddled that they don't understand what's going on. Well, internationally, you could come to that same situation. I don't know how long that would last if they had some kind of international agreement and said the unit is going to be, the Troy grain, and somehow India or Russia or whatever was started cheating in some way in this system, the thing would shake itself to pieces very quickly. So I was just giving you the analogy. Take the United States. How would this be done properly? You have a gold depository. The unit is the Troy grain, and people transfer their ownership interests within the gold that they hold in their state depository from one person, one business, whatever, to another in terms of Troy grains. And why do I pick the Troy grain? Well, that was the standard unit of weight. But it turns out the value of gold, $2,000 an ounce. Well, what's a Troy grain? 480 grains. A Troy ounce, 480 grains. All right. One grain of gold is still a significant, quote unquote, dollar amount. You're not going to be buying a loaf of bread with gold if you're using Troy grains. You have to pay in grain. But the computers don't care. That's the beauty of the system we now have. You can put as many decimal places as you want to the right of and many zeros as you want to the right of the decimal point. Right. So in this kind of a system, you could buy a loaf of bread. It's 1/1000th of a grain of gold. And the computers handle it. That's the accounting side of it. Right? It's digital in that sense. We can divide this physical piece of gold into thousands and thousands of parts because it's all in the sense of a fiction in the computer's mind. And then at some stage down the road, if someone wants to actually get his hands on that gold, we say, okay, how many troy ounces is this actually? And the transfer occurs. So you imagine you have 50 of these, one in each state. And they're interacting under some national statute that requires them to maintain the structures, the security, the ability of these systems to operate and respond if there was outages of power, whatever. You have all these regulatory structures built in, but the reality of it is it's not backed by gold. The unit is not backed by gold. The unit is gold. And these other things are the guys with the green eye shades. They're the accountants, where their computers are actually individuals writing notations in account books. And that's what people have to realize. The thing that they look at, this whole banking structure, leave aside the business of the banks, but just in terms of paying deposits, paying into the bank, into your checking account, and then paying out, kind of simple picture that most people understand, that's an accounting mechanism. And the question is, what are you accounting for? Is it a real thing? Or is it some kind of political fiction? What is it? And that's why I say when somebody tells me it's going to be backed by gold, I say, well, wait a minute. We had that fiasco once, and it's not going to work this time because instead of having 12 federal regional banks all within the same system, all subject to the same legal rules, courts, and so forth and so on, the enforcement mechanism, because law is not much use unless it can be enforced, that system collapsed. So that would be the two questions I would ask them. What do they mean by backing? If I'm a participant in this system, and that's another level, who is going to be the participants in this system? Will it simply be the countries themselves? And then you'll have another layer in each country of their national banking structure that will participate in this. And so I, as an individual, will be using this national currency. Maybe they all look the same, but they're certainly going to have some indication of which ones are issued by Russia, which ones are issued by India, etc. And I, as the Indian citizen, I'm dealing with my Indian unit. And that Indian unit is then somehow tied into this international structure. And I, as the Indian citizen, ask the question, how do I get the backing? Because maybe I'm not so sure I want to trust the Indian government anymore. So I'm going to hedge on this. I want to take a certain amount of my gold and get it out of that system. Can I do that? Well, if you can't do that, it's another fraud, another scheme. Let's not call it fraudulent because maybe then trying to be honest. But it's another scheme that won't work. We already tried this and it failed. We tried it when one country had this huge amount of stability coming out of World War II, which is probably not the situation now. There's still too much fluidity in the world internationally. But if what they were going to do was to set up a system in which there were gold depositories in various countries, and these depositories were all linked in some way through the digital accounting system, and I, as the Russian citizen, or I, as the citizen of India, could actually withdraw gold or deposit gold, my gold, within this system, then I would say, well, that's a great advance if you can solve the legal problem. How do I enforce this? And probably the answer would be the one I'm just suggesting, that they set up a depository in each country. And I, as the man in the street, or whatever they call that person in India, I can deal directly with my Indian depository, and that Indian depository is tied into all the other depositories, and there might actually be some regional depository, whatever, however they want to set that, federal, like the Federal Reserve System, right? But I, as the Indian citizen, would be able to participate in the system in the real sense of having the ability to get control of that gold, either to deposit it or to remove it. If they're not going to do that, forget it. Okay, it's going to be a game that's played. Going around, we're essentially putting lipstick on the same pig, different colors of lipstick on the same pig. And there's no overriding control by one legal system. How do I keep the Indians from cheating or the Russians from cheating or whatever? How do I do that? So that would be the beauty of setting it up in the United States. You have a depository in each state run by the state treasury. The citizens of the state, or the depositors, they would include the citizens of the state, the depositors own the actual gold. And the depository is simply a mechanism for safe storage, and then built on top of that is this digital system for transfers of ownership interests in that particular pile of gold. And then each one of those depositories obviously would be linked with one another because you'd have interstate transactions going on. And they'd all be using the same unit and operating on the same principle of private ownership. Even talking about state treasury would be a private owner in a sense of that gold. And then they're all linked in a legal system which controls them so that you can't have the depository in Texas playing games and thinking that it can, in a sense, cheat in some way. I mean, you can always have people trying to do that, but there is legal recourse that's the same across the whole jurisdiction. Now, that would work. And it would be completely different from what we have now because no one would be talking about backing. There's nothing between you and this Troy unit. This is it, Joe. And when you say, I'm transferring so many Troy units on my debit card, because we're talking about all of these electronic systems, my credit card, my debit card, whatever, that's what's being transferred. It's this real thing. It isn't that debit card transaction that's the money. The debit card transaction is the accounting order to transfer ownership in that gold from Jones to Smith. And the fiction of the intermediary, the fiction of this currency, something different from the backing, disappears, which is what you absolutely need. The currency is the thing there. It's not the backing. There's nothing back of gold. There's simply gold. That's what we're transferring. And the digital units are not money. They are accounting orders of one kind or another to transfer ownership interests in some pile of gold. And you simply can't imagine, Troy grains being transferred hand to hand. Well, I guess you can, because some people are putting out these slivers of gold or gold foil in plastic wrap or whatever. I mean, yeah, okay, they may have that. That's kind of a toy. I'm looking at that. But in this system, you would never look at the Troy grain as being somehow a physical unit. It was inconvenient. I can imagine most of that gold would never leave these depositories if they were secure. Obviously, people believe that there wasn't some kind of hanky-panky going on behind the scenes. It would never leave. Why would it have to leave? And it would be the ultimately honest system, because there's no intermediary, no layer of intermediary currencies that can be manipulated in some way. There's no way you can manipulate that kind of a system. You can't increase or decrease the stock of gold in the depository arbitrarily. Right? No, if you did, that would be a crime. And you make the penalties extremely severe. Make them real felonies. You know what a real felony is? It's a loss of... This is what's fascinating, because they've lost this concept. Word felony in the Constitution, you would think someone would have looked at that at some time and said, what was this? Felony under English law was the loss of all your goods. You're convicted of felony, you lost everything you had, and then they superadded the penalty of death. So in many instances, the penalty of death was also there. But you lost all your goods. So that was a harm to your family, let's say, because whatever you had was gone, was all forfeited. That's serious business, and that's what you do. You want to stop any kind of money manipulation? That's what you impose. Extraordinarily serious penalties. All right, so you have the extraordinarily serious penalties. You have all the gold, in a sense, in a box, in a secured location. The transfers occur electronically at the speed of light, right? And maybe you'd have some kind of backup system where there would be, actual printouts or whatever, so you could deal with the problem of breakdown of the, electric grid or whatever. How is that system going to fail? How can it possibly fail? And the answer is, well, it can't. All the things that we've seen with banking systems tied to the Treasury or not tied to a Treasury, wildcat banking as opposed to national banking as opposed to Federal Reserve. All the problems we've seen with those can't possibly occur with the gold depository, gold unit, and then the beauty of the digital system. You can take that one grain and, a tenth of a grain, hundredth of a grain, thousandth of a grain, 10,000th of a grain, whatever, 0.0000001. All right. So now, for the first time in world history, because of the great things that the technocrats have done for us, we can now have a real gold standard system that works. The problem in the past always was that you had a limited number of coins of different weights, whether within the United States, within France, within England, whatever it was. And then those are all different. So what happened intermediary? Here's a $10 gold piece. Here's a $20 gold piece. Here's a $5 gold piece. Here's a one. For a while, there were $1 little tiny coins like buttons. Right? But what about the intermediate prices? You weren't buying bread for a gold dollar, right? And so they had to invent the token coin system, which was based on some base metal. And supposedly that was good because you could redeem enough of those. Because you had enough of those coins, you could redeem those in a gold coin. Or you went to the paper money system. Oh, that's beautiful. See, with the paper money system, of course, we can write $10.35 on a piece of paper, and how convenient that is. It's also very convenient for the fraudsters in the fractional reserve system. So we want to get rid of that. How do we get rid of all of those problems? We get rid of those problems because now technology tells us we can make transactions in 1/1,000,000th of a troy grain of gold. So we can actually buy bread in gold. Or we can buy a Mercedes-Benz in a larger amount of gold. There's no limit now. So that's the system that removes all of the problems, other than the problem of dishonest people running it. Accountants playing games, people actually stealing the gold, whatever, right? And for that, you have some sort of security measures. But it solves all of the other manipulative problems in the fractional reserve concept, or what people call inflation. These phony increases or decreases in the money supply. Well, you can't increase or decrease. The way the depository would increase the money supply is if more customers brought gold to it, period. The way it would decrease its money supply is if customers took their gold out for some reason, or took their gold out from the depository in Texas and for some reason put it in the depository in Minnesota. But you can't increase or decrease the supply of gold within that system. You might have more gold mined somewhere, and then this particular individual will get that gold and deposit it in the system. So you'd have the market control over the amount of gold that would be involved in the system. Well, that's the ultimate control, the free market. Because it costs resources, labor, capital to mine gold. And then if you want to use gold for artistic reasons, you want to use gold for dentistry, you want to use gold for computers or whatever, electronic reasons, well, the price of that is going to be determined by the free market. So the free market looks at this as, here's how much gold we want to be used in these depositories. Here's how much gold we want to take out of these depositories to be used for non-monetary purposes. Here's how much of our resources, non-gold resources, we want to pour into mining and refining to produce more gold to put into the depositories. The whole thing's subject to control by the market. And that's the only control you have over these systems. The price structure. What are the value of labor, capital, gold in this form, gold in that form, gold for this use, gold for that use, determined by the market. And the government's role in this is to maintain the security of the gold in the depository, maintain the honesty of the digital accounting system. And it's pretty easy to maintain the security of gold in a depository, right? Fort Knox type concept. And as far as the accounting system is going, you impose extremely savage penalties for anyone that attempts to play games with it. We solve that problem. And you notice we've never imposed extremely savage penalties on these banking systems at any point in time. It was always, this, that, and the other thing, we'll bail them out in one way or another, or we'll go from the national currency cartel to this even bigger cartel. Bankers will have even more control than they had in the past to play more games. No. And that was because they were in league with the politicians. They have to stop that. And the easiest way to stop, in my view, is you have a system that is so simple-minded that no one can look at that and say, well, gee, I don't understand what's happening here. Here's what's happening. You put some gold in a box, and you have an accounting system where you get a computer that recognizes how much gold is in that box, and that you're a customer, and that Joe Schmo is a customer, and that he is transferring to you, or you are transferring to him, some amount of that gold that you hold. That's a really simple system. There's very few ways to manipulate that. Well, we don't have that, okay?
Well, the very feature of it being hard to manipulate probably explains in the modern political climate why it has been left untried.
And that's the problem with the BRICS thing that I see. The first thing is, how do you secure whatever system you set up, assuming there would be one that would be superior to what we have now, that the backing would not simply be backing, but it would be real ownership interest. How do you secure that internationally when they're not all in the same legal system? No matter what kind of protocol they create for this, how is the fellow in India sure that he's going to be able to get that gold that's in a depository in Russia? Right? What's the enforcement mechanism? And that's why I say, if I were writing this internationally, I say, well, you got to have a depository in Russia, you got to have a depository in India, you've got to have a depository in Brazil, you got to have a depository in South Africa. And those countries will be responsible for those depositories. And under the laws of those countries, the customers of those depositories will be able to control their operations. And internationally, all of these depositories, national depositories, will work together in a international federalized system, and we'll create some protocols for that. And the only way to enforce that, I guess, is to create some kind of quote-unquote international committee or whatever that would have oversight authority. And then the question is, well, how do they enforce it? If Russia cheats, how do we enforce it? From India? I don't know. That's been the problem of international relations since forever, right? How do we enforce this peacefully? So I'm all for it, except I think it has some practical problems. But I could see how it could be done in the United States because all of the 50 states are part of the same legal system. No question that you could enforce one of these gold-backed fantasies that we're talking about now in Minnesota or in Texas or whatever, because they're all part of the same legal structure. But what I've always been looking for is to have one of these things set up somewhere. It could be done in one state. There's no problem in doing it in one state. State certainly has the authority to set up one of these depositories. Texas has a depository. They're not really using it this way, my understanding is typically the amounts that are deposited there are quite large. It's mostly a security operation. But theoretically, they could run it this way. Now, they don't have a unit, the troy ounce or the troy grain. They haven't set that kind of a system up. But there's no reason they can't. It's just an accounting mechanism. And that would be the test of it. And it would be open, obviously, to everybody in Texas. And it would be open to everybody else, potentially in the United States. You'd see how it would work. But as far as I understand, even the Texas people are not. Actually, that isn't true. There's a bill that was proposed in Texas to do something like this, except that what it proposed was that I think it was the comptroller of the Treasury should come back to the Texas legislature with a proposal. So we're still waiting to see if that ever happens. I don't know if the bill was actually passed, but assuming that it would be passed, then it would go to the comptroller to come back. No. The thing has to be done once and for all by a piece of comprehensive legislation, not playing games with this, because you're trying to substitute a new system for what, well, it wouldn't be substitute, it would be competitive. People could still use the Federal Reserve System if they wanted to, but there would be this competitive system. And you've got to convince people this competitive system is sound and and honest. And therefore, I wouldn't. I want to be sure that everything was, frosting on the cake in a sense. You had all the decorations, and that would be in some kind of statute, very comprehensive statute. I wouldn't leave that open to interstitial regulation by people. Here's the way this thing works. If someone doesn't abide by these regulations, savage penalties accrue. End of discussion. We'll see what happens. Now, the other side of this is what happens if these BRIC nations accomplish the goal of setting up some kind of currency backed, if you will, by gold, whatever that would be, that is perceived as more stable than the Federal Reserve System. And I mean politically and economically more stable. What happens to the Federal Reserve note? U.S. dollar. Does it continue as the world reserve currency? No, of course not. Because now there are two currencies that are initially are equally valuable in international trade. And are the BRICS nations, once they set this up, going to accept Federal Reserve notes as a currency within their jurisdictions? Well, of course not. Federal Reserve people who have Federal Reserve notes will have to transfer these notes, exchange them somehow in the marketplace for BRICS notes, whatever they would be called, in order to buy and sell within the BRICS system. Oh, well, now you have international monetary competition at the highest level. Didn't that lead to wars in the past? International monetary competition, in which the political authorities were not interested in monetary stability; they were interested in political power. Right? That's the whole point of the Federal Reserve. They keep saying this. Oh my God, we're in this wonderful position that we have economically because of the power that we gain from the Federal Reserve note being the world reserve currency. It's a power instrument. It's part of the projection of American, I won't say imperialism or whatever they call it, exceptionalism, right? This concept that we're the most powerful, the end of history and so forth. This is it. Oh, and it's this unit that's doing it for us because we've convinced befuddled the rest of the world into believing that they ought to use this as their money. Well, once the rest of the world is no longer befuddled by that concept, once they realize, well, wait a minute, there's bipolarity here. We can choose to use this other currency, which is just as good, or maybe in many respects better, because it's being run on an honest basis, because it's being run by countries that have vast resources beyond what the United States can control, especially when the United States is, not. The oil example is, we have enough oil and natural gas to be the supplier of the whole world for how many years, hundreds of years. And you've got the Biden administration, we're going to shut that all down. Oh, okay. What's the backing to the Federal Reserve note? The backing to the Federal Reserve note is the productivity of the United States, right? Well, you start cutting out the productivity of the United States, say, well, I'm not going to produce oil, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. Oh, people look at the Federal Reserve note and say, well, this thing is a hollow currency. It's not really backed by anything. That was always the argument when they went away from gold, the backing, right? We're going to take it so far back that you won't get it anymore. Was, well, the Federal Reserve note is backed ultimately. It's not by gold. It's backed by the huge productivity of the United States. Oh, really? What happens when that productivity fails? Because stupid politicians get into office, which is what they have now. Not because we had it for a long time, but especially now. And the BRICS nations, or the people within the BRICS nations, look at it and say, well, what's your productivity backing your unit? It isn't there anymore. We have the resources. We're going to exploit them. And we have a huge market. Think of all the people we have. Bring in India, Brazil, and so forth. Know their populations. Right? Potential there. So we in the BRICS nations are not going to deal with Federal Reserve notes anymore. They're an alien currency. Oh, my goodness. Now, what happens to American imperialism? Well, what's always happened to imperialistic states when they're challenged? Okay? And you're going to tell me there's going to be friendly cooperation, that the financial moguls in control of the American system are going to say, oh, yeah, we're going to give up 50% of our power to these other countries? Because that will maintain stability, and they don't care about stability in the world. They care about looting the world. That's what they've been involved in forever. They loot one region, they loot one country, and then after World War II, they loot the world. So they're not going to give that up. So there's another problem on top of this. So the first one is you have the backing of the currency. What does that really mean? Number two, how are the BRICS nations themselves going to give credibility to this system? All the way down to the Indian in the streets of Calcutta, the average man, whatever they call him in India. How is that going to be done within a legal system that involves separate national states? And then how are they going to respond to the currency wars and other kinds of wars, trade wars and God knows what other kinds of pressures that will have to be brought to bear by the moguls in the United States to try to maintain some semblance of the importance of the Federal Reserve. I say the importance because it will immediately stop being the world reserve currency. If the BRICS thing gets off the ground, then you're going to have competition between those two, between the Federal Reserve bloc, if you will, the countries that are still in the orbit of the United States, and all these BRICS countries. There won't be a single world reserve currency. They'll be fighting back and forth. That's why they're so afraid of, like OPEC and so forth. No, once these people start using some currency other than the United States, what's the consequence of that? And they've been worried about that for a long time, and that's on a much smaller scale. Right, because OPEC could turn to the ruble, could turn to the Chinese, what is it, yuan, whatever name they have for it, renminbi. I don't remember, they change their names all the time. Whatever that is, but those were single national currency alternatives to this Federal Reserve note hegemonic position. Well, now what happens if you have all of these BRICS countries, and maybe others that will sign up later, which have a tremendous amount of economic power, political power, military power, and all of a sudden they gain that they leverage that into financial power by coming up with a more stable currency unit and more efficient currency accounting system that now exists. They'll do something better than SWIFT. Come on, give me a break. Right? They have. You're going to tell me the Chinese don't have, or the Indians, or the South Africans, whatever. They don't have people clever enough in computers to come up with something at least as good or better? Of course they do. It's stupidity to think they don't. But as soon as they do, now we have this rivalry. Well, what now happens? You can't have really two world reserve currencies, can you? My hypothesis, equal, in their importance. I wouldn't think so. So now we get to a really competitive system in which all bets are off. Every kind of competition is on the table. And I think they know that. I think the BRICS people are looking and saying, we're sick and tired of the hegemonic position of the United States. They play these games constantly. It's a vast looting operation based on this fictitious currency they have, which is simply an artifact coming out of World War II. And we don't need that anymore. Right? I'm not going to deal with Jones Bank, even though Jones Bank is the only one in my town, because I know that Jones is not honest. So I'm going to use a Smith Bank. I may have to go, 30 miles, but I'm going to use the Smith Bank. And then what's Jones going to do? He's going to call my loan, I guess. So he's going to do something to me. He's going to create a critical situation in my town. And that's what we have here, just on a bigger scale. So I say great for them. This has to be done at some stage because the Federal Reserve note structure will collapse. And that would be true even if we didn't have crazy people running the government of the United States. The system's inherently unstable. And so you have to replace it. Well, how do you replace it? And my view in the United States was we replace it with real depositories, real gold, and we do this in a sequential fashion. We put one in Texas, we put another one in whatever other states, and slowly but surely people gain confidence in this, and the market moves us away from the Federal Reserve System, and either the Federal Reserve System complies, and economically, the Federal Reserve System says, "Oh, well, we're going to use this unit." Treasury of the United States says, "We're going to use this unit too," or they go under. What's the problem? Well, the problem is you have a political crisis. Even within the United States, you have a political crisis between the people who control the Treasury of the United States, the moguls, and the people who control these state depositories. There's no way to get around it. You've created a banking system which is run in the interest of a certain clique. It always has been. Only the names of the people change, but their positions in society and their desires and ability to control the political system have always been the same. And in order to loot the economy, they've set up these various monetary and banking structures with the connivance of the politicians and on the basis of the basic ignorance of the average man and woman. But the systems are unstable. And so they have one crisis after another. And the ultimate crisis is when you have the competitor with a more stable system. It doesn't have to be completely stable, just more stable. Now, where are you? Well, the question is the competitor as strong as you are? Well, those countries have lots of resources, and they have lots of people. They have big economies in that sense. So could they make it work? Well, why not? What more do you need? Honest currency, obviously, honest monetary system. And then you have the competition. because they will now be asserting within their segment of world trade that this BRICS unit is going to be the currency for international exchanges within their huge, as it were, common market. And they would simply say, Federal Reserve, no, forget that. You're going to have to go to the exchange and take a terrible exchange rate to be able to come into our market system, or semi-market system, whatever it is they have, their economic system. In order to buy and sell within the BRICS nations, you're going to have to use the new BRICS currency. And to get that, you're going to have to go into the international money exchange and exchange your Federal Reserve notes at an increasingly disadvantageous rate for BRICS currency, until at some point the BRICS currency becomes the world reserve currency, and sayonara, Federal Reserve. Well, that's life and death, right? Everything has life and everything has death, including banking systems. We've seen that over and over again.
And sometimes the transition is accompanied by warfare.
Or accompanied by something terrible, yeah, economic warfare. I mean, the British pound sovereign, right? That was the international money. What happened? The British went under as a result of World War I, particularly, and then World War II. Churchill finished them off, right? They're gone. British Empire is gone, right? Does anybody think about that anymore? What a terrible loss. It's gone. It's like Uncle Harry. You know, he died 10 years ago, and we don't think much more about him except, you know, on his birthday we might remember him or something. But he's gone. And that's exactly the situation. Now, but the problem is the moguls don't want it to go. They're not going to go. They're not going to go peacefully into the darkness. Quiet in the darkness. Well, peacefully. Not forget quietly. Peacefully. Right? They're going to do everything they can to sabotage, stop this thing from developing at all, sabotaging its working at the beginning, and then if it seems to be successful and is going to replace the Federal Reserve note, hegemonic world reserve currency, then they'll go to other means. And, you know, what is war? War is politics by other means. Politics or economics by other means. Right? You want to control the free market, you go to politics, right? Get some legislators or regulators to pass statutes or write regulations. Oh, and if you have conflict between nations, between these sets of regulators and politicians, then you go to war. Simple as that. So you look at this, say, oh, this is great economically in principle, this is a great idea. And they can do it. Listen, I look at this anyway, that any of these countries has the same right as the United States to set up their own currency system, individually or collectively. There is no hegemonic right of the United States to have a world reserve currency, or a currency that anyone treats as anything but a rotting vegetable. A currency that isn't worth any more than Venezuela's currency. All right? But we have a lot of, how shall I put this, military power in this country that is indirectly controlled by the financial hegemons, by the oligarchy. And that's the great danger, that they will use this in the name of some kind of fictional national interest of the United States, national security, to attack this BRICS system, one way or the other. I mean, I can't imagine they're going to start World War III over it, but there are all sorts of ways that you can impose pressure, let's call it that, pressure on those countries. Oh, I mean, the Russian situation now, all this talk about Russia, this is all the result of their failure to loot Russia sufficiently when the Yeltsin regime collapsed, if you remember that. The Yeltsin regime collapsed, the Soviet Union collapses, and you had all these state-run industries, which were owned, according to their system, by the individual Russian. Every individual Russian owned some very small amount of every one of these state industries, owned by the people, right? So what happened? Instead of privatizing those industries in a way that would protect the ownership interests, financial interests of the average Russian, they let the oligarchs run wild. And there was a lot of looting that went on. And then eventually you get to, what's his name, Putin, and Putin, he had his own set of oligarchs. I mean, he kicked out these other oligarchs, and he had his own set of oligarchs. And those oligarchs, the original oligarchs, they were, what shall I say, nonplussed by this, and they were upset by it. They wanted to completely loot Russia. They wanted to divide it up into a lot of little countries, balkanize it, and steal all of its resources. And he said, no. Keep these resources for the Russian people, as it were, under his control of his regime. Well, that's fine. That's the way they want to run that country. That's the way they want to run their country. They certainly don't have a duty to let oligarchs come in and loot their economy. But the oligarchs still want to do this. That's why you hear all this talk about how regime change in Russia. We got to break Russia up. And so baloney. It has nothing to do with the desire to have democracy in Russia, any of this other nonsense. It's to set up an operation where they can loot that country even more than they looted it under the Yeltsin era. So you don't think they would do the same thing against some BRICS banking system, some BRICS monetary unit? Of course they will. And that's the real problem with it. And that's like problem number 4, or question number 4. How are the BRICS nations going to prepare to deal with that? Okay, they can set all these things up, just like the state treasuries that I have, the idea of depositories in each one of the states. How would the states prepare to deal with some intervention, hostile intervention by the U.S. Treasury Department? And the answer is, well, there's the U.S. Constitution, which says states can make gold and silver coin, the tender. Okay. Reserve power, and we have a constitutional principle that we can apply there, and then we'll see how that plays out in the real world. But at least you can imagine a strategy. Say, well, here's how we protect the state depositories. Here's this Article 1, Section 10, authority of the states, and that's what we're going to interpose, as it will, between our state depositories and some attempt by the regulators and the Department of the Treasury tell us not to do it, or the Federal Reserve System tell us not to do it. Okay, but so at least you have a plan. And I would just wonder what the plan. Obviously, they're holding this close to their vests, as this expression goes. What the plan would be for the BRICS nations when the currency war starts. Okay, so I imagine the foresighted people in the back room there are thinking exactly about that. Yeah, we can set this up. Here's how it will work. We can make it transparent and honest and blah, 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 so that economically people will want to use this. Yes, we think this will go to the point where we become a rival to the Federal Reserve System as world reserve currency. Yes, we think we can actually surpass them, considering how they're screwing up their own economy. But then, when they become desperate, when the oligarchs, the moguls in the United States become desperate, what happens? How do we in the BRICS nations defend ourselves against what they will try to do? Right? The mad dog is loose in the children's playground. Have we prepared for this? And that's a big question, isn't it? Because the mad dog is not going to go away. There's no way in hell that the Federal Reserve System and the oligarchs, moguls behind it, are simply going to say, "Oh well, we've been defeated. They have a much better currency, so we just have to give up." No. Absolutely not. So I think, on the one hand, it's a good thing in principle, but on the other hand, it opens up a real Pandora's box, doesn't it?
And that's both internationally and if this happens between the states and the U.S. as well. Either way, it opens up a theater where you've got basically a corrupt bully being defied by those who no longer want to be bullied, and it doesn't end peacefully in most cases. It will be important to be kept aware of the principles at play as this moves forward, and as you pointed out in the beginning, one of the enabling factors that has allowed this corruption to drag on for decades and centuries is the ignorance of the American people. That's why we have you here to help us reach out to over 90,000 subscribers to get all of us less ignorant so that we can make more intelligent and meaningful participation in this process going forward. Fully aware that although that we are talking about standing up to the corrupt bully, that it means a lot. It means a great commitment from all of our parts, and maybe more than we realize when we just say, let's just stand on principle. Yes, that's the right place to stand, and what's likely to come of it is what we should talk about more as this moves forward. We'd love to have you come back and give us updates as we move forward. And as states like Texas or others may make progress in that regards, we'd like to talk about that as well. And don't forget, folks, if you can find a copy of Dr. Vieira's book, Pieces of 8, you'll get a great background that led up to this discussion. Dr. Vieira, any last words of wisdom for where our people can find your writing online?
Well, it's just that. Look me up, Edwin Vieira, and you'll find quite a few, not only written materials, but various YouTube video interviews or presentations, a number of them dealing with exactly this question, not at the international level, but the ability of the states to do what we've been talking about. And this is going to happen. Let's face it, you have economic instability, which is insoluble given the present system. And so these alternatives are going to develop as more and more people or other countries recognize it is in their interest to move away from the present unstable system. That's the unfortunate part about unstable systems. If there's any freedom to remove yourself from them, you do. And certainly internationally, I think the states could do it in the United States, we'll leave that aside. Certainly internationally, countries like India, Russia, South Africa, whatever, Brazil, they have the ability to move away if they work in concert. And that's what they've discovered, that the system is too unstable, and the alternative to that is some kind of concerted activity. And here's the plan, and we'll see how informed, if you will, the plan is about economic and political reality. But once that concept, that germ of an idea, we have to do something different. Well then, those things are going to have a kind of a life of their own. Because once you realize that you're in an unstable situation, then you're going to take action to try and protect your own interests. Let's put it that way. Protect your own interests, national interests, or in this particular case, a concert of nations, to see if their national interests are all congruent. And if that's the case, good luck for us, because they can bring more and more countries in to that system, and we don't have the ability to sell our system to those countries because our system has been seen to be, let's not say quite unworkable because it's continuing to work, but to be highly unstable. So if countries are going to choose one or the other, the likelihood, you go to the grocery store and there are two cabbages. One you see is rotting and the other is fresh. Which one do you buy? You have the Federal Reserve System and the whole financial structure based on the U.S. hegemony is a rotting vegetable. And if this BRICS thing looks a little fresher, if you will, looks like it maybe came from the farm yesterday, not 2 weeks ago, the consumer will buy the fresh vegetable. It's common sense. Why are you going to go for a rotting currency, a currency that's failing, currency that's politically manipulated all the time, to this other thing, which, at least initially, you have some confidence in?
Yeah, it brings me back to the meme from the Great Depression with the gangster era, when the gangs would be selling the beer or selling the whatever, whether the restaurant wanted it or not. You're going to take it and you're going to buy it, because otherwise the gang's going to be called in on you. And Ron Paul's Peace and Prosperity Institute, referring to the government as the mafia with a flag. So unfortunately, when you start refusing the forced participation in a corrupt scheme which victimizes you, you got to deal with the criminals. So, Dr. Vieira, we've got to wrap, but thank you so much, and we're going to have to pick this up again as events progress, and wanted to help people get more aware. And I think you've set a great step forward for us here on awareness, and we appreciate always your visits here with us on Liberty and Finance.
Okay, thank you, Donegan. Appreciate it.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we can let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Kaiser, my brother Elijah, or my father Dunnigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.